Okay, so today we're gonna dive into something pretty powerful.
Yeah.
It's from the summer 1992 issue of BMB magazine,
Okay.
and it's a poem
All right.
called "First Proof Animal Crackers" by Richard de Zoysa.
Oh, wow. First Proof Animal Crackers. That's an interesting title.
Yeah, and I think you start to get a sense of what he's doing with this poem, even from the dedication, which is for Dmitri when he is old enough to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot packed in there already, isn't there?
Right, and it was written July 25th, 1983 in Colombo.
Wow. So right in the thick of things.
Yeah, and the author, Richard de Zoysa was really a celebrated figure in Sri Lanka. He was an actor, dramatist, a television
The
journalist.
Renaissance man?
He was, and tragically, he was murdered in February 1990.
Oh, wow. That's awful. I mean, it adds a whole other layer to this poem, doesn't it?
It really does, and I think to kind of understand the poem, you really have to read it with his author's note in mind.
Oh, for sure. Context is everything with a piece like this.
Yeah, so he really lays it out pretty plainly. He says the lion is the heraldic emblem of the Sinhala, or the lion race,
Right.
and the tigers are the name of the principal Tamil terrorist group. That's the language that he uses.
Okay.
And then the elephant is the party symbol of the ruling United National Party.
Okay, so we've got a lot of players here represented by these animals.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so fascinating, is that he's using these seemingly very simple images. You're talking about animal crackers.
Right.
But to get at this incredibly complex reality, which is the Sri Lankan Civil War.
Yeah, and the way those simple images can become so loaded with meaning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our mission, if you will, today is to kind of unpack those layers and to see how he's using these metaphors to really illuminate what was going on during this conflict.
I'm ready. Let's dive in.
Okay, so the poem opens with this line, "Draw me a lion."
Okay.
It's such a simple request. It's kind of this, you can imagine a child saying that, right?
Absolutely. That childlike innocence.
Yeah, and the way that he describes this lion at first, a lazy, kindly beast. He says, colored yellow. It only bites sometimes,
Okay.
and only if you pull its tail or mistake it for a cat.
So it's like a powerful force, but a benevolent one for now.
Right, mostly it's indolent, biddable, basking in the sun of ancient pride.
Interesting. So we have this image of the lion as powerful, but also like kind of lazy, maybe even complacent.
Yeah, and what's interesting is within this description of the lion, we have these parenthetical lines.
Okay.
He says, outside the sunlight seems a trifle dulled, and there's a distant roaring like a pride of lions cross at being awakened from long, deep sleep.
Oh, so there's a hint of something else there, isn't
Yeah,
there?
it's like this undercurrent of tension, almost like this peacefulness of this lion is maybe not the whole story.
Right, and that image of the lions being crossed at being awakened, that kind of foreshadows something, doesn't it?
Yeah, so then the next request is, draw me a tiger.
Okay, so we're shifting gears to a different animal now.
Right, and his initial image of this creature is so different from the lion. It's this beast compounded of Jim Corbett yarns and Blake, stalking through my mind, blazing nature's warning black bars on gold.
So this tiger is much more menacing, much more explicitly dangerous.
Right. It's this much more primal, kind of fearsome creature.
Yeah, and how does that request end? I mean, we had draw me a lion. How about the tiger?
Just the word draw.
Wow. Okay, so that's a big shift in tone there.
It is. It's really abrupt, and what follows is so powerful.
I bet lay it on us.
You turn and draw the gun on me, as if to show that 3 years old understands force majeure, and as you pull the silly plastic trigger, all hell breaks loose. Quite suddenly, the sky is full of smoke and orange stripes of flame.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there.
There is. But I mean, just the quickness of that. You go from a child playing to this incredibly violent image.
Right, and that phrase, silly plastic trigger next to smoke and orange stripes of flame, it's like that juxtaposition of child's play with the very real consequences of violence.
It's like you were saying earlier, this shattering of innocence.
It is, and then he has this line right after that that's really interesting. But here, there are no tigers here. There are only lions.
Right, and I think you have to remember his author's note here, where he's telling us what these symbols represent.
Absolutely. So how do you read that line then?
Well, I mean, if the tigers are the Tamil separatists and the lion is the symbol of the Sinhala majority,
Right.
then it seems to be saying that in this specific situation in Sri Lanka, at this moment in this conflict, there's only one real power.
Right. It's a statement of dominance almost.
Yeah, and maybe even a way of saying that the threat or the fear of the tigers is maybe not the whole story or the most immediate danger.
That's a really thought-provoking interpretation.
And then he introduces another element into this, this allegory of the conflict.
Oh, yeah, what's that?
It's the jackals.
The jackals.
He says their jackals run panting rabid in the roaring's wake, infecting all with madness as they pass.
Wow, so not only do we have the lions and the tigers, but now these jackals running around spreading chaos.
Right, and it's such a disturbing image. This sense of a kind of a disease spreading.
Yeah, it really speaks to how conflict can bring out these darker forces in society.
And then we have another character, or rather another symbol.
Okay.
It's my lord the elephant.
All right, the elephant. So who's that representing again?
That's the ruling United National Party.
Right. Okay.
And he sways in his shaded arbor, wrinkles his ancient brows, and wonders if, did he venture out to quell this jungle tide of rising flame, he'd burn his tender feet.
So the elephant is like this wise old figure, but also kind of hesitant to get involved.
Right, there's this sense of inaction, of being unwilling or maybe afraid to actually engage with what's happening.
Like he doesn't want to get his hands dirty.
Right, and that line about burning his tender feet, I mean, it suggests a real aversion to the messy reality of this conflict.
Yeah, it's a powerful image of how those in power can sometimes be paralyzed by indecision.
And then the speaker tries to shift gears again. He says, put down that gun. If you do, and you're good, I'll draw a picture of an elephant, a curious beast that you must understand.
So it's like he's trying to bring things back to a place of peace and understanding.
Right, to redirect the child's attention away from the violence and towards something, maybe more hopeful.
Yeah, but the way the poem ends, it's like that hope is so fragile.
It's heartbreaking, really. He says, don't look out the window, just a party down the lane, a bonfire and some fireworks, and they're burning. No, not a tiger, just some silly cat.
Oh, wow. So he's trying to downplay the violence to make it seem like something harmless.
Yeah, it's like this desperate attempt to shield the child from the truth of what's happening.
And that line, just some silly cat, it's like a twisted echo of that earlier description of the lion.
It is. And knowing that this poem was written on July 25th, 1983, during that period known as Black July, when there were these horrific anti-Tamil pogroms,
Right.
It makes those lines all the more chilling.
It does. It really drives home the tragedy of what's happening.
Yeah, so, we've been talking about these animal symbols, but I think it's important to remember all the other imagery in the poem, too. The fire, the smoke.
For sure, they all contribute to this sense of chaos and destruction.
And also to this idea of things being hidden or obscured. Like the truth being hidden behind this facade of normalcy.
Right. Like the speaker is trying to create a different reality for the child, a reality where the violence isn't so real or so scary.
And when you think about the fact that this poem was published in BMB magazine,
Yeah.
This magazine that's all about art and culture.
Right. It gives it a whole other dimension.
It does. It's like this poem becomes part of a larger conversation about how art can respond to these kinds of really difficult situations.
Yeah. It's a way of bearing witness to the human cost of conflict.
And so I think if we're going to try to distill this down to some key takeaways, I think one of the big ones is that, this seemingly simple poem about animal crackers is actually this really profound meditation on the Sri Lankan Civil War.
It is, and it's so effective because it operates on so many different levels. It's got this surface level of childlike innocence, but then underneath that, there's all this complexity and darkness.
Exactly, and I think the date is so important too. July 25th, 1983.
Absolutely, it's not just a random date; it's a very specific moment in history, a moment of intense violence and upheaval.
Right, and knowing the author's own story.
Yeah, his own tragic end.
It adds this real weight of foreboding to the whole poem.
It makes you wonder if in some ways he was also writing about his own fate, his own vulnerability in the face of this larger conflict.
That's such a good point. And I think, for our listeners out there, the real question that this poem leaves you with is, how do seemingly innocent things become entangled with these much bigger political and social realities?
Right. Like, how does something as simple as a child's drawing become a reflection of an entire nation's struggle?
And how does a poem like this help us to understand the impact of conflict, not just on those who are directly involved, but on everyone, even the most innocent?
It's a powerful reminder that these issues touch all of our lives in some way, and that we can't just turn away from them.
Exactly. So I think, de Zoysa's poem really challenges us to look closer, to pay attention to the ways that these larger forces are at play, even in the seemingly smallest moments of our lives.
Yeah, and to recognize the power of art, to make sense of those forces, to give voice to the voiceless, and to help us to heal and to move forward.
Absolutely. So I hope, our listeners out there will, maybe take some time to read this poem themselves,
Yeah.
to sit with it and see what resonates with them.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a read and a reread and maybe even a third read because there's so much there to unpack.
Absolutely. And maybe, think about the ways that these kinds of symbols operate in our own world today.
Hmm.
How are we using language and imagery to talk about the difficult issues that we're facing?
Right, because these issues aren't just confined to the past, they're still with us today in different forms.
Exactly. So let's keep that conversation going.
Mm.
Let's not let these powerful voices from the past fade away.
Agreed. Let's keep listening, let's keep learning, and let's keep talking.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive,
It was my pleasure.
and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.